Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how Baroque composers use motifs as the basis for writing. So this will help give an insight into Baroque music, but also an insight into writing with motifs if you want to write in any other style. We're going to take a piece by the great user of motifs in the Baroque period, Johann Sebastian Bach, of course, and we're looking at his Sinfonia in B minor, BWV 801. So, you've got the score. Let's see what's going on, because what I want to look at is how this particular piece is made up of kind of three motivic elements, and we're just going to see what these three ideas are and then how Bach's using them to construct the piece. So just to give you a flavour of the piece before we start talking about the detail, it starts like this. And so on. So that's the kind of flavour of this piece. Now let's have a look at what's going on. Well, the first idea is this one. So let's talk about that one for a moment. Just in these first two bars, these first two measures, in the right hand, we've got this. So there's his first sort of principal idea. Now, even this is, while you can look at the whole totality of those two bars, you can also kind of break it down a bit, can't you? Because what have we got? We've got this sort of three-note idea, haven't we? So you feel this 1, 2, 3, okay? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So little groups of three notes. But how are they organised across these two measures? Well, one thing you might notice is that tucked in the middle here, we have these repeated F sharps. Every time on this motif, the second and the third notes of each group of three are F sharp, just repeating. So it's a kind of inner pedal point right at the beginning of the piece, which is interesting in itself. And it's a dominant pedal point. We've got this Sinfonia in the key of B minor, so we just keeps coming back to this repeated dominant, which means that alongside that, we've also got these kind of single melody notes. So let's see what they're about. So we've got B, G, B, C sharp, G, C sharp. Slightly kind of strange in a way, isn't it, that you've got this falling third, but then you've got this tritone in the second measure, the second bar there. So that's quite intriguing in itself. But you see how all this then combines to give you this. So that's how you make that up. Now, furthermore, there's a kind of symmetry within each bar. You'll notice in the first bar, the first measure, the first beat is the same as the last beat. And the same thing happens in the next bar. The first beat is the same as the last beat. So there's a kind of symmetrical structure. In the first bar, you've got B, F sharp, then we've got the thing in the middle, then we go back to the B, F sharp, then in the second bar, C, F sharp, the thing in the middle, which is the same, you'll notice, as the bit in the middle of the first bar. So the bits in the middle are the same in both bars. Then at the end of the second bar, we're back to the C, F sharp thing again. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that, okay, you've got a musical idea that's spread across these two bars, these two measures, but you also have to kind of see how it breaks down, to see how these ingredients are quite motivic within this two measure, this two bar idea. So this, if you like, is idea one, kind of motif one, which has kind of motivic design within it. Now, alongside that, we've also got something going on in the left hand. So let's see what this is about. I mean, I'm ignoring this first note for a moment simply because it's just starting the piece with a tonic note in the left hand. So that's not essential to the issue we're talking about. So we're really talking about these notes. Now, what happens here? Okay, now that is a contrasting idea to the first idea that we were talking about. That first idea has got this dominant pedal point repeating, so we've got repeated notes. Well, in this second idea, we haven't got repeated notes, have we? We haven't quite got this same symmetrical design that we talked about with the beginning and the end of each of those measures. It's not working in quite the same way. We haven't quite got the same disjunct design, you know, fourths and fifths going on here. This is much more conjunct, everything going by step until one small leap at the end. So all by step, and then just this falling third before we finish by step. So there's that. So in other words, we've got a different design here, but it's purposely designed to contrast with the first motivic element, if you like, that we talked about. Now, this one also breaks into two halves. So you can see, here's the first half. Then we have that longer note. And then we're repeating the same rhythm with different notes. So you hear this as a kind of posing a sort of musical question, if you like, and then there's an answer. And if you break it down, it's a very simple design. We start on B, we move to A sharp in the middle, and we come back to B. And if you like, the rest of it is kind of decoration around that idea. But you see how the first idea is contrasted with the second idea. You know, if Bach was writing this as a fugue, well, this might be a subject, this might even be a counter subject, or it could even have been written the other way around. But it's that idea that there's a lot in common, particularly the rhythm, but there's also something distinctive about it. And even in the rhythm, you can see that the first idea is kind of continuous semiquavers or 16th notes, whereas the second idea has this long note in the middle that splits the whole idea into these two halves. So there's a kind of difference in design between those two ideas, but there's also cohesion. Okay, so now we've done that, we go into the next measure, the next bar, and we've got idea number 3. So what's idea number 3? So suddenly we're whizzing along at a good old speed, aren't we, with our demi-semi-quavers, our 32nd notes. And this is arpeggiated. So all that's happening here is that we have a chord of B minor, a tonic chord in the key of B minor, and we're just bouncing up and down that chord. So B, D, F sharp, B, and then we come down and there's a little sort of figuration where we duck and dive a little bit to fill up the whole of that measure with notes that purely belong to that chord. So faster rhythm, disjunct movement, and just spelling out a chord. It kind of results in a fairly slow harmonic rhythm as well, because if you notice, we've really got chord 1 in the first bar. Really, this is chord 5 in the second bar. We're back to chord 1 in the third bar. So the harmonic rhythm is going quite slowly, kind of 1 chord per bar. But we've already seen how we've got idea 1, idea 2, idea 3. And when you look through the rest of this, you'll find that the whole of the rest of the piece is derived from those 3 ideas. So within the space of the first 3 measures, the first 3 bars, we've got the 3 ideas that form the content of the piece. Now, it's interesting to go on and just think, well, the trouble is if you're the composer and you've kind of struck all your 3 ideas in the first 3 measures, what do you do next? Are we just going to keep repeating them and bore everybody to death? What do we do with them? So it's quite interesting to see how Bach actually uses these little motifs. Now you notice what happens for the next pair of bars or next pair of measures. He's actually using the first two measures again, but turning the hands upside down. So here in the right hand, we have all the notes that were previously in the left hand. And in the left hand, we have all the notes that were previously in the right hand. Which means, of course, that one thing Bach is thinking about is writing invertible counterpoint. So if you write something one way up and then you flip the parts round, does it also work equally well the other way? So at the beginning we had now we've got in measures 4 and 5. So it works perfectly well the other way up. You can't assume that. Sometimes you can write something and if you switch the parts round, it doesn't work at all. So Bach is thinking about invertible harmonic writing and the counterpoint there. Okay, so that's how he fills up the next two bars or the next two measures. Well, what happens next? Well, you can see what we've now got is the idea that it was the third idea that was presented in bar 3, measure 3. Now, that time it was just the right hand, wasn't it, doing this. Well, do you notice now what we've got is the left hand doing what that right hand was doing before, an octave lower. But now we've got an upper part. So it's now going in two parts, sort of mainly a sixth apart, just with the odd fifth in. So that's using that third idea, but to kind of developing it in a different kind of way. So, okay, we've managed to take ideas 1 and 2, switch them upside down. We've managed to take idea 3, add a second part above it so that there's something kind of more exciting happening with that. So what does he do next? Let's have a look at what happens from the end of the second line of music. We get this. Okay, well, we can see what's going on here, can't we? We're using ideas 1 and 2, as we've labelled them, to spin this little bit of sequence. So we've got idea 1 going across in this middle part at the end of the second line, then it goes to the upper part, then it comes back to the middle part, then it goes to the upper part. So in other words, what he's now got is this little conversation going on between the upper two parts. And is he using the whole of the first idea? No, he isn't. He's just using the first part of it, because you can see we've just got the first part of it going on there and the first part of it, and so on. So the idea that you can write something that's based on some motivic element, but not have to use all of it all the time, just use half of it. That's what he's doing here. So you hear between the upper parts, we've got a sustained note in one part while the other part's busy. Then they switch over again, switch over again. So you can hear that little conversation going on between the upper parts. And how, while the busy part is going along in those semiquavers, those 16th notes, Bach is happy for the other part just to sustain a note. So we've got something a little bit stable going on while we're at it. Now, what's the left hand doing? Again, just using the first bit of this idea. So we've got, and then running it out again in sequence. And then running it out again a little bit lower. Then running it out again a bit lower. So by doing that, we get some key movement because we're in B minor, the home key there. We go into the next bar, the next measure, and we start to use the dominant seventh in A major. So we're in B minor, which is chord 1 in B minor, but it's also chord 2 in A major. Then we go to the dominant seventh of A major. So he's used the B minor chord as a pivot chord to take us out of B minor to A major. We then have 5/7 in A major. Then we're going to chord 1 in A major. And then in the next bar, we go to a kind of 1/7 in D major, which is rather juicy actually. And then he goes on from there into a G major chord. So we're kind of taking these ideas that were presented on the first line, we're starting to develop them. We've got this long note that's conversing with this little exchange with the top two parts, using the first half of the first motive idea. We've got the bass part using the first half of the second motive idea, and then it's all being used in sequence, and it's being used to modulate away from the home key. So this is the next way in which it gets used. Okay, so we've got to that point. So we're already seeing how this is getting developed as we go to the piece. So what's going to happen next? Well, we've just been using those first two ideas. So guess what he does next? Over the next few measures, we are kind of using the third motivic idea. So now what's he doing? Well, we've got the right hand, then the left hand takes over, then we've got two hands together, but quite widely spaced. Then the right hand, then the left hand, two together, right hand together, and then the left hand keeps busy while the right hand slows down. So there's a real kind of dialogue going on now between the two hands, using that idea that we first had in the third bar, the third measure of the piece. And you can feel that little interlocking of, right hand on its own, left hand on its own, oh, hands together, right hand on its own, left hand on its own, hands together. You see how that little conversation unfolds. And of course, it's all spelling out some harmony as well. So that's kind of G major, E minor, A major 7, F sharp minor, D major, and then we're moving on. But the point about this is that while we're busy with this third idea, the harmonic rhythm is beginning to speed up as well. And all of this is beginning to sort of move us in the direction of D major being our key. So by the time we get to the end of all that excitement, we're now in D major. By the time we get to the last bar of the page, you can say we've kind of cadenced in D major. Well, that's not a big surprise, because D major is the relative major of the home key B minor. But the main point is to think, what are these three ideas? How are they getting used? Okay, so what happens next? Well, now we're in D major, and we've got this idea being used. That's obviously come from the first idea, isn't it? But we're now in D major. And notice the left hand is going back to, which is the original bit of the second idea. We've just moved into a different key. Okay, let's have a look at where the second page goes. Now this just continues at the top of the second page, so the same ideas. So that's what he was doing at the beginning. Now, when we come to the next bar, the next measure, we've got idea 3 in the right hand. So that's going on, just the idea of arpeggiating, breaking up these chords. The left hand, so you can see where that idea's come from. It's the idea 2. So now we've got idea 3 in the right hand, idea 2 in the left hand, and they're kind of working together. So that's what's going on there. Okay, then we come into the next bit. We've modulated to A major, by the way, just while we've been going through that. So bit of key movement. Well, what's happening next? Right hand. that's a full statement, isn't it, of the first idea. So we've been chopping that in half, but now we've got a full statement. What's the left hand doing? Well, a full statement of the second idea. So, we're in A major, kind of reworking all this. So we know what's coming next. We're going to use the third idea. And sure enough, that's what Bach does in the right hand. Using it to modulate. The left hand, notice we're still going with this. So that's a kind of continuation of that idea too. And the bass is just filling in some of these long notes. So we know that this use of longer notes is an incidental idea. Difficult to say that those long notes are anything motivic because they're just kind of sustained notes. They're filling in the harmony. They're giving us a little bit of sustain alongside other parts that are busy. But here we're seeing this combination of these two ideas, aren't we? It's from here, so you see how those two ideas are getting used there. Now, what happens next? Well, we've got this idea being used in conversation in the upper parts again. So see how this goes, along with long notes in the part that's not using that idea, and the two parts sort of switching over. Upper part, second part, upper part, second part, upper part. So that conversation, we've seen this earlier in the piece, haven't we? But it's just being worked in a different context now. Meanwhile, what's the left hand up to? Well, it's continuing to use this idea it's been using since here. And then on we go. And then a sort of variation. And then this variation continued. And this variation continued again. So you see how that little variation of it being used and repeated in the second half of all that. Okay. What do we do next? Well, now we go to the third idea and we have a few bars, a few measures of that conversation again between the hands. So all B minor, E minor, a crossing of hands. That's another little development. A major, D major, crossing of hands, G major. Notice the contrary motion now. So the contrary motion is another little development of idea 3. So you see how he chops bits off, evolves ideas, converses idea 1 with idea 2, or idea 1 with idea 3, or idea 2 with idea 3, and then sort of finds a new way of doing things. Now we've got a bit of contrary motion, a bit of hand crossing going on. It's continually unfolding. Okay, what happens next? Well, if you see the right hand here, and then it gets into conversation with the middle part again. Top part. And meanwhile, what's the left hand doing? We're going back to a touch of idea 2. But not for long, because after that, the bass part is just holding some long notes. So it doesn't get involved in continuation of that motivic idea. So it's the conversation in the right hand, a touch of idea 2 in the left hand, and then the left hand going to sustain notes. And we're back in B minor. And then he decides to settle on this chord. So we've had an interesting little touch in the previous bar, this C natural. You might be thinking, well, what's all that about? It's a kind of chromatic upper auxiliary note at one level, but it does come on a beat. So it's suggesting the Neapolitan chord of B minor, which is C major in first inversion. So it's just a hint of that on the approach to this kind of significant moment where we have a 5/7 dominant seventh in its last inversion. And notice how the whole world stops. We've had all this busy rhythmic stuff and then it stops. And you're thinking, what's he going to do now? And you're thinking, well, this is just going to be the end. So he's now going to finish off. But he makes a bit more of a meal of it. After that, he then gets into idea 3. And then passes into the left hand. And changes the chord, so G major. And then suddenly you think, E sharp, what's he doing with an E sharp there? And then we've got this idea back. And you think, well, E sharp, this is beginning to feel like a 5/7 first inversion in the key of F sharp. I thought we were in the key of B minor. Well, the next chord is an F sharp major chord. So that kind of resolves the previous bar, but then he puts an E natural on the top, so that F sharp chord becomes the dominant 7th of B minor. Rather nice touch, isn't it? But meanwhile at the top, what's happening? We're back on idea 1. And then that's all back on idea 1. So we've got... And then suddenly all 3 parts going in similar motion, which we haven't really had before. It's rhythmically connected. It's connected to earlier motifs, but all parts going in the same direction as a way of kind of emphasizing the build up to the final cadence. And then we move into our final cadence, which is a kind of fairly standard thing. 1 in first inversion, and then we've got a 6/4/5/3. So it's 1 second inversion, 5, and 1 to finish. But hopefully you can see through that explanation how we started with 3 motivic ideas. Those ideas have a kind of internal life of their own, especially the first idea and to some extent the second idea. The third idea maybe to a lesser extent. But then how he uses that to compose the whole piece. So hopefully this is an insight into the way Bach often writes. It's an insight into the way that Baroque composers often write. So if you're wanting to understand Baroque music, or if you're playing Baroque music, just kind of trying to flush out what these components are, how they're used, how they're modified and so on, is quite a useful thing. Then you can draw it out in your performance. But as I say, even if you're writing in a totally different style and you're just sort of thinking, well, how do I use the little ideas that I've got here and spin them into a piece? Here is a brilliant example of how to do that.